Before we dive into the story, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more heart-touching tales. Wishing you a beautiful day now. Sit back and enjoy the story. The silk sheets felt like liquid moonlight against Celeste Rivera's skin as consciousness slowly pulled her from the depths of sleep. Her eyes fluttered open to unfamiliar surroundings that made her heart skip a beat. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Manhattan skyline in golden morning light, while furniture that screamed wealth and sophistication surrounded her like props from someone else's life. The lingering scent of expensive cologne made her stomach flutter with equal parts excitement and dread. This definitely wasn't her cramped studio apartment in Brooklyn. Celeste sat up carefully, her head pounding with the rhythm of a salsa beat. The events of the previous night came back in fragments. The farewell party at Morrison & Associates, celebrating her departure from the small advertising agency to pursue her dream job at Sterling Dynamics. The mojitos. Too many mojitos. Jessica's infectious laughter as they danced. And then him. Tall, devastatingly handsome, with dark hair, and eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. She remembered his voice, smooth as aged whiskey, asking her to dance. "You move like you're painting stories in the air," he'd said, making her laugh despite herself. The memory of his hands on her waist, strong yet gentle, sent shivers down her spine. She'd been bold that night, reckless in a way that wasn't like her at all. The kiss came back to her in waves, passionate and desperate, like they were trying to communicate in a language only their bodies understood. But his name remained frustratingly blank. Celeste looked down at herself, wearing nothing but a man's white dress shirt that hung loosely around her shoulders. The fabric smelled like him and made her pulse race with memories she wasn't sure she wanted to examine too closely. Her black cocktail dress lay crumpled near the sofa like evidence of her temporary insanity. She gathered her clothes with the stealth of a cat burglar, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. "You're a professional, Celeste," she muttered under her breath, struggling into her dress. Not some character in a romance novel. She found her purse by the door and pulled out her phone. 17 missed calls from Jessica and a string of increasingly frantic text messages flooded her screen. "Where did you go? Are you alive? Please tell me you didn't leave with that mysterious stranger," Celeste groaned. So it was confirmed she had indeed left with a complete stranger and apparently had the night of her life. The evidence was written all over her body in the form of tender marks on her neck and the gentle ache in muscles she'd forgotten she had. Unable to leave without saying something, she grabbed a hotel notepad and scribbled a quick message. "Thank you for whatever this was. I hope you have a wonderful life." She hesitated, pen hovering over the paper. Part of her wanted to leave her number, wanted to see where this could lead. But the rational part of her brain, the part that had been burned by relationships before, reminded her that she was starting fresh tomorrow. New job, new life, no complications. Celeste slipped out of the luxury suite like a ghost, taking the elevator down to the marble lobby, where doormen in crisp uniforms pretended not to notice her walk of shame. The morning air hit her face as she stepped onto the sidewalk, and she hailed a taxi with as much dignity as she could muster. As the city blurred past the windows, she made herself a promise. Whatever had happened in that hotel room would stay there. Monday morning was about new beginnings. She wasn't going to let one night of passion complicate the fresh start she'd worked so hard to achieve. Sterling Dynamics was her future. Everything else was just a beautiful mistake she'd pretend never happened. Monday morning arrived with the subtlety of a marching band. Celeste stood in front of the gleaming Sterling Dynamics building, a 40-story glass monument to corporate success that scraped the Manhattan sky. She clutched her coffee like a lifeline, her navy blazer pressed to perfection, her dark hair pulled back in a sophisticated bun that she hoped screamed serious professional. "Today's about new beginnings," she whispered to herself, straightening her shoulders. No thinking about mysterious hotel rooms or men who kissed like they were trying to steal your soul. The lobby buzzed with morning energy. Expensive heels clicked on marble floors. The aroma of premium coffee mingled with ambition, and the low hum of important conversations filled the air. Celeste felt a thrill of excitement mixed with nerves. This was it, her shot at the big leagues. She was directed to the creative department on the 23rd floor, where she met her new teammate, Jessica Park. Ironically, it's the same Jessica who'd been texting her frantically all weekend. Celeste. Jessica squealed, practically bouncing. Out of her chair? I can't believe we're working together again, but more importantly, you disappeared Friday night with that gorgeous stranger and haven't answered a single call. Spill everything. Celeste's cheeks flamed. Nothing to spill. Just a mistake I'm pretending never happened. Jessica raised an eyebrow, but was interrupted by the office manager's announcement. All staff to the main conference room for the new CEO introduction in 10 minutes. The conference room filled quickly, buzzing with speculation about their new leader. Celeste found a seat in the middle, far enough back to avoid attention, but close enough to appear engaged. She reviewed her notes, trying to project the image of a dedicated employee rather than someone who'd spent the weekend. Recovering from the most passionate night of her life, the room fell silent as the door opened. A figure entered with the kind of confidence that commanded attention without effort. Tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that fit like it was designed specifically for his body. Dark hair, piercing eyes, and a presence that made the air itself seem to crackle. With energy. Celeste's pen clattered to the floor. It was him. The man from the hotel, stranger who'd made her forget her own name with his touch. The one-night stand she'd sworn to forget was standing at the front of the room, scanning the crowd with those same intense eyes that had undressed her soul 3 nights ago. "Good morning," he said, his voice carrying easily through the room. "I'm Damian Cross, your new CEO."
Hey!
Their eyes met across the crowded room, and Celeste felt the world tilt on its axis. Damian's expression didn't change. He was the picture of professional composure, but she caught the slight tightening around his eyes. The barely perceptible pause in his introduction. He remembered her. Of course he remembered her. Celeste wanted to sink through the floor to disappear into the building's foundation and emerge somewhere in China. Instead, she sat frozen, watching as Damian outlined his vision for the company with the same commanding presence that had drawn her to him on the dance floor. "I believe in pushing boundaries," he was saying, his gaze occasionally flickering. To her section of the room, in taking risks that others might consider inadvisable, sometimes the most unexpected partnerships yield the most extraordinary results. Was he talking about business, or was there a double meaning in his words? Celeste couldn't tell, and that terrified her. After what felt like an eternity, the meeting began to wind down. Employees started shuffling papers and checking phones, ready to return to their desks. Celeste had almost made it to the door when his voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Miss Rivera," she froze. Every head in the room turned to look at her. Jessica's eyes widened in shock, and Celeste could practically feel the curiosity radiating from her colleagues. "Yes, sir," she managed. Her voice surprisingly steady, despite the fact that her heart was performing gymnastics in her chest. "I'd like to see the Henderson campaign proposal on my desk by tomorrow morning," Damian said, his tone perfectly professional. "I hear you have creative instincts that might serve us well." The emphasis on creative instincts made her cheeks burn. "Of course, Mr. Cross. I'll have it ready." He nodded once, a gesture so formal it almost made her doubt that she'd ever seen him smile. Almost, as the room emptied. Celeste remained rooted to her spot, watching as Damian gathered his papers, with the same methodical precision he'd used to drive her wild with wanting. When he looked up one final time, their eyes locked, and she saw something flicker in his expression. Heat that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with unfinished business. Then he was gone, leaving her standing alone with the dawning realization that her fresh start had just become infinitely more complicated. "Celeste," Jessica whispered, appearing at her elbow. "Please tell me you didn't sleep with our new CEO." Celeste closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her mistake. Or was it fate settling around her shoulders, like Damian's shirt had that morning? "I can't tell you that," she whispered back, "because that would be a lie." The next morning, Celeste arrived at Sterling Dynamics 30 minutes early, armed with extra coffee and a determination to prove she was more than just a weekend mistake. She'd spent the entire night crafting the Henderson campaign proposal. pouring every ounce of her creativity into layouts that would make Damian Cross see her as the brilliant marketing coordinator she truly was. Not the reckless woman who'd left cryptic notes in hotel rooms. Her desk had become a war zone of sketches, color samples, and crumpled coffee cups. Jessica found her there at 7:30, looking like she'd been wrestling with inspiration all night. "Celeste, you look terrible," Jessica said, settling into her own workspace with a concerned frown. "Did you sleep at all?" "Sleep is overrated," Celeste muttered, making final adjustments to her presentation boards. "I need this proposal to be perfect, better than perfect, because you're trying to impress our devastatingly handsome CEO, who you may or may not have slept with." Celeste shot her a warning look. "Because I'm trying to prove I belong here." At exactly 9 o'clock, she knocked on Damian's office door. The mahogany surface was polished to mirror perfection, and she caught a glimpse of her reflection. Professional. Composed. Ready to pretend her heart wasn't hammering against her ribs like a caged bird. "Come in." His voice sent involuntary shivers down her spine. She pushed open the door to find Damian seated behind an imposing desk, his attention focused on a stack of financial reports. He looked up as she entered, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Silence stretched between them like a tightrope. "The Henderson proposal," she said finally, her voice steady as she placed the presentation boards on his desk. Damian leaned back in his leather chair, studying her with those penetrating eyes that seemed to see everything she was trying to hide. "Close the door." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Celeste hesitated, then turned to push the door shut with a soft click. When she faced him again, the professional mask had slipped just enough to reveal something darker underneath. "We need to talk," he said, "about the campaign. You know that's not what I mean." Celeste's pulse quickened. She forced herself to remain standing, hands clasped behind her back like a soldier at attention. "I don't think there's anything to discuss, Mr. Cross. Friday night was a mistake. One that won't happen again." Damian stood slowly, moving around the desk with the fluid grace of a predator. He stopped just close enough that she could smell his cologne, the same scent that had clung to his shirt when she'd worn it home. "Mistake," he repeated, his voice low and dangerous. "Is that what you call it?" "Yes," the word came out, breathier than she intended. "I call it a lapse in judgment that has no place in a professional environment. And yet here you are, in my office, wearing a perfume that reminds me of how you tasted when I kissed your neck." Heat flooded her cheeks. "Mr. Cross, this is inappropriate." So was leaving without saying goodbye. The accusation hit her like a slap. Celeste lifted her chin defiantly. "I left a note." A note? His laugh was bitter. "How thoughtful." "What? Did you expect a formal goodbye? Exchange of business cards?" She was getting angry now, which was better than the trembling awareness that threatened to overwhelm her. We were strangers having a good time. Nothing more. "Nothing more," he echoed, moving closer. "Is that why you're trembling right now?" "I'm not trembling," but she was, and they both knew it. Damian reached out, his fingers barely grazing her wrist, and her pulse jumped beneath his touch. "Tell me you don't remember," he said softly. "Tell me you don't remember the way you said my name when I stop." The word tore from her throat. "Please, I need this job. I've worked too hard to get here to let one night ruin everything." Something shifted in his expression. The predatory intensity softened, replaced by something that might have been understanding. He stepped back, creating space between them that felt both necessary and devastating. "You're right," he said, his voice returning to its professional tone. "This conversation is inappropriate." Relief and disappointment warred in her chest. "Thank you." Damian returned to his desk, picking up her presentation boards with deliberate care. "The Henderson proposal is excellent work. Creative, innovative, exactly what I'd expect from someone with your talent." The compliment should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like consolation prize. "I'll have my assistant scheduled a presentation for Thursday morning. The client will be impressed." "Thank you, Mr. Cross." Damian. The name slipped from his lips like a secret, and Celeste felt something crack inside her chest. "In the office, it's Mr. Cross," she said firmly. He nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement and perhaps respect. "Of course, Miss Rivera." She turned to leave, her hand on the door handle when his voice stopped her. "Celeste, She didn't turn around, couldn't risk looking at him again. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I don't consider Friday night a mistake." The words followed her out of his office and haunted her for the rest of the day. At the clock, 9:30 p.m. Who else would be here this late? Her question was answered when Damian's voice cut through the silence. "Working late again, Miss Rivera?" She looked up to find him standing in the doorway of the creative department, his tie loosened and the top button of his shirt undone. He looked tired, human in a way that made her chest tighten. "The Nexus campaign won't design itself," she replied, keeping her tone neutral. "May I?" He gestured to the empty chair beside her desk. Every instinct told her to say no, to maintain the professional distance they'd carefully constructed. But something in his expression, a vulnerability she'd glimpsed only briefly before, made her nod. He sat down, studying her work with genuine interest. "Tell me about it." For the next hour, they discussed strategy, target demographics, and creative vision. It was the kind of collaboration Celeste had dreamed of when she'd imagined working at Sterling Dynamics. Damian's insights were brilliant, his feedback constructive, and his passion for the work infectious. She almost forgot to guard herself against the way he leaned closer when examining her sketches, or how his laugh made her stomach flutter when she made a particularly clever observation. "You're remarkable," he said suddenly, the words slipping out like an unguarded confession. The comment hung between them, loaded with meaning that had nothing to do with business, and everything to do with the electric tension they'd been pretending didn't exist. "Mr. Cross," she began, but he held up a hand. "Damian, we're alone, Celeste. Can we drop the formalities for 5 minutes? That's not a good idea. There was leaving you that note 3 weeks ago, but here we are." "You what?" The words tumbled out before she could stop them. Damian's expression grew complicated. "The note you left. I may have responded to it." Celeste stared at him, processing this revelation. "What did you say?" "That I hoped you'd change your mind about having a wonderful life without me in it." The admission hit her like a physical blow. All this time, she'd assumed her hotel room goodbye had been final, clean, uncomplicated. But there had been another note, one she'd never seen. "Where did you leave it? On your purse? Must have missed it in your hurry to escape." "I didn't escape, I left." Semantics. They stared at each other across the suddenly charged space between them. The professional masks they'd worn for weeks began to slip, revealing the raw attraction that had been simmering beneath the surface. "This can't happen," Celeste whispered. "What can't happen?" But instead of answering, she found herself studying the way the late evening light from the window cut across his features, highlighting the strong line of his jaw and the intensity in his dark eyes. He was beautiful in a way that made her forget why she'd been fighting this so hard. Celeste. Her name on his lips was a question and a plea. "I could lose my job. No one has to know. I would know." But even as she said it, she was leaning closer, drawn by a magnetism she couldn't resist. "Is that really what you're afraid of?" The question cut straight to the heart of her defenses. It wasn't the job she was afraid of losing. It was herself. The control she'd worked so hard to maintain. The professional identity she'd built like armor around her heart. "Yes," she lied. Damian saw through it immediately. "Try again. I'm afraid you'll consume me," she whispered, the truth spilling out before she could stop it. "I'm afraid I'll lose myself in you the way I did that night, and I won't be able to find my way back." "Maybe that's not something to be afraid of." It's easy for you to say. "You're the CEO. You have all the power here." "Do I?" His voice was rough, with something that sounded like desperation. "'Cause I've spent 3 weeks trying to concentrate on board meetings while wondering if you remember the way you fell apart in my arms. I've rewritten emails to you a dozen times because I can't figure out how to sound professional when all I want to do is remind you how good we were together." His confession shattered the last of her resistance. Without thinking, she reached out and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his cheekbone. He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch like a man desperate for water. "This is dangerous," she breathed. "Everything worthwhile is." When he kissed her, It was nothing like their first encounter. That night had been wild, reckless, fueled by alcohol and the anonymity of strangers. This was deliberate, intense, loaded with weeks of suppressed longing and the weight of everything they stood to lose. The kiss deepened, and Celeste found herself standing, pulled into his arms by a force stronger than gravity. Tasted like coffee and possibility, and when his hands tangled in her hair, she made a sound that was part surrender, part recognition. This was what she'd been running from, not him, but this. The way he made her feel like she was coming alive after years of simply existing. The sound of the elevator chiming in the distance broke them apart like a gunshot. They sprang back from each other, breathing hard, the spell broken by the harsh reality of where they were and what they'd just done. "I should go," Celeste said, gathering her things with shaking hands. "Celeste, wait." But she was already moving, fleeing once again, because now she knew the truth. She wasn't afraid of losing her job. She was afraid of finding out what it would feel like to let herself love Damian Cross completely, and then having to watch it all fall apart when the real world intruded on their perfect storm. Celeste didn't sleep that night. She paced her small Brooklyn apartment like a caged animal, replaying every moment of the kiss that had appended her carefully constructed world. By morning, she'd made a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. She was going to request a transfer to the Los Angeles office. It was the only solution that made sense. Put 3,000 miles between herself and Damian Cross before she did something that would destroy both their careers. LA office had an opening in their creative department, and her success with the Henderson campaign would make her an attractive candidate. She'd crafted the email to HR 5 times before finally hitting send at 6 a.m. Professional, brief, citing personal reasons for the relocation request. It felt like signing her own execution warrant. The response came faster than expected. Meeting scheduled for that afternoon with Margaret Chen, the head of human resources. And unfortunately, the CEO's approval required for inter-department transfers, which meant facing Damian one more time. Celeste arrived at the meeting 10 minutes early, her resignation letter tucked in her purse as a backup plan. Margaret was a sharp woman in her 50s who'd built her reputation on handling delicate corporate situations with discretion and efficiency. "Miss Rivera," Margaret greeted her with a professional smile. "I understand you're interested in our Los Angeles office." "Ma'am, I believe the change of scenery would benefit my creative development." "Interesting. Your work here has been exemplary. In fact, Mr. Cross specifically mentioned your innovative approach to the Henderson campaign." Heat crept up Celeste's neck. "I appreciate the recognition." The door opened, and Damian entered with the controlled precision that characterized all his movements. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him like a second skin, and when his eyes met hers across the conference table, she saw a flicker of something that might have been betrayal. "Mr. Cross," Margaret began, "Miss Rivera has requested a transfer to our Los Angeles creative department. Given her outstanding performance, I wanted to discuss the parameters of such a move." Damian took a seat, his expression unreadable. "I see. And the reasoning behind this request?" Celeste felt the weight of his stare but kept her focus on Margaret. "Personal growth opportunities. It's a chance to expand my portfolio in a different market." "Personal," Damian repeated, the word carrying layers of meaning that made her chest tighten. "The LA office would be fortunate to have someone of Miss Rivera's caliber." Margaret continued, oblivious to the undercurrents in the room. "However, there are contractual considerations. You signed a 2-year commitment when you joined Sterling Dynamics, Miss Rivera. Breaking that commitment would require significant cause." Celeste's heart sank. She'd forgotten about the commitment clause, so eager to join the company that she'd signed without thoroughly reviewing all the terms. "What constitutes significant cause?" she asked. "Harassment, unsafe working conditions, breach of contract." "By the company." Margaret glanced between Celeste and Damian. "Has anything occurred that would qualify under these parameters?" The question hung in the air like a loaded gun. Celeste could feel Damian's attention laser-focused on her, waiting to see if she would destroy them both with the truth. "No," she said quietly. "Nothing like that." then I'm afraid the transfer would need to wait until your commitment period expires or until a position opens that requires your specific skill set. Neither scenario is likely in the immediate future. Damian had remained silent throughout the exchange, but now he leaned forward slightly. Actually, Margaret, there might be another solution. Both women looked at him expectantly. We've been considering expanding our international partnerships. Our London office has expressed interest in developing their creative department. It would mean a 6-month temporary assignment, with the possibility of extension if the fit is right. Celeste stared at him, trying to understand what he was offering. London, even further than Los Angeles. A clean break wrapped in professional opportunity. That's an excellent suggestion, Margaret said, already making notes. Miss Rivera, would an international assignment interest you? She looked at Damian, searching his expression for clues about his motivation. Was he trying to help her, or simply remove a complication from his own life? The position would come with a significant increase in compensation, he added, and priority consideration for creative director roles when you return. It was everything she could have hoped for professionally, a chance to work internationally, advance her career, and escape the impossible situation she'd created. So why did it feel like he was tearing her heart out? It sounds like an incredible opportunity, she managed. Excellent, Margaret said. I'll draft the paperwork this afternoon. You could be in London within the month. After Margaret left to handle the logistics, Celeste found herself alone with Damian once again. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Why? She asked finally. Because you deserve the chance to build the career you want without complications. Without you mean... He looked directly at her then, and she saw the cost of his offer written in the lines of his face. Yes, and what if I don't want to go to London? Then you stay, and we figure out how to work together professionally. But Celeste, you and I both know that what happened last night changed everything. You can't go back to pretending we're just colleagues, she wanted to argue. But she knew he was right. The careful boundaries they'd constructed had crumbled the moment he'd kissed her. Maybe London is the right choice, she said, hating how the words tasted like defeat. Maybe it is. They stood simultaneously, drawn together by the same magnetic force that had been their undoing. Damian reached out, his fingers grazing her cheek with heartbreaking tenderness. For what it's worth, he said softly, these past few weeks have been the best and worst of my professional career. Damian, when you're in London, designing campaigns for clients I'll never meet, I want you to remember something. What? That night we met, before we knew who we were or what we stood to lose, you told me you felt like you were flying. I want you to feel that way about your work, about your life, even if it means flying away from me. The tears she'd been holding back finally spilled over. What if I don't want to fly away from you? Then come back, he said simply. When you're ready, when you've built the career you deserve, when you know for certain that choosing me isn't just choosing the easy path. Come back, and we'll see what's left. 1 month later, Celeste sat in a London cafe, reviewing layouts for her first international campaign. The work was challenging, the city inspiring, and her colleagues brilliant. She was living the dream she'd crafted for herself. So why did every successful presentation feel hollow without Damian there to share it with? Her phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. Boss man asked about you today, casual as anything, but his poker face is terrible. Also, the Henderson client specifically requested you for their next campaign. Your reputation is growing, my friend. Celeste smiled, feeling something shift in her chest. Maybe Damian had been right. Maybe she needed to build something that was entirely hers before she could figure out what she wanted to build with someone else. But as she watched couples walk hand in hand along the Thames, she found herself counting the days until her 6-month assignment would end. Because for the first time in her life, she was discovering that success felt meaningless if you had no one to share it with. 3 months to go. 3 months to decide if what she'd left behind in New York was worth the risk of everything she'd worked for. 3 months to decide if love was worth flying back for. The ideal like this video if the story touched your heart. Subscribe for more emotional tales, and share with someone who believes in the power of true love. Let us know in the comments. We love connecting with our global community of romance lovers.